Hi guys, Craig here and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So, on the 20th of October 1993, the tip line for America's Most Wanted got a very bizarre phone call. They had just aired an episode about a cold case where a woman's body was found in a road near California, tied up, gagged and burnt beyond recognition, with her belongings and diapers all around her, and a deep cut in her back. The police thought that she was burnt along with an infant, but they could never find a single clue as to who or what had happened to her. But this caller had information. She says that it was her sister, and that their mother had killed her along with another, and the mother's name was Theresa Knorr. But before we get into the details of today's case, please give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And hit that bell icon to be notified every time that I upload a video. So let's begin. Theresa Knorr was born to Swaney and Jim Cross on March 14th, 1946. She was part of a blended family, as her parents had children from previous marriages, and for the first few years of her life, things were good. Her father was an assistant cheesemaker while her mother worked in a pencil factory. The pair worked hard and eventually saved up enough money to move from Sacramento to Rio Linda into a bigger home for the entire family. But things didn't go as well as they first hoped. Eventually, the life that comes with owning a big house started to catch up on Jim and Swaney. Their bills were stacking up, and they just didn't have the money to pay them. And while all this was happening, Jim ended up being diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he went through an unsuccessful brain surgery that left him unfit to continue to work. So suddenly, he found himself unemployed. This put all of the responsibility of running the house onto Swaney. But having to work so much put her under crazy amounts of stress. All of it ended up being far too much for her. And on March 2nd, 1961, only 2 weeks before Theresa's 15th birthday, Swaney suffered a fatal heart attack and died in Theresa's arms. This put Jim into a state where he began to get really angry and eventually took out his anger on his children. He was unable to keep up with the household bills, so had to sell the house. And Theresa took this as her opportunity to move out on her own. At 15, she dropped out of high school and started living on her own. At 16, she married a man called Clifford Clyde Sanders. Clifford would end up being the first of many husbands of Theresa, but he was the one that would suffer worst of all. Theresa didn't have the easiest of childhoods, which meant that she was a little messed up. This meant that she would frequently get into arguments, and Clifford wasn't much different. He responded with the same energy, which led to the two often getting into fights, and some of them would even get physical. On July 16th, 1963, Theresa gave birth to the couple's first child, Howard Clyde Sanders, and within a few months, she was pregnant again. With the stress of having a newborn and being pregnant once again, her regular, positive nature ended up becoming something monstrous. The fights with Clifford got worse and worse, to the point that on June 22nd, 1964, she even called the cops on him, after claiming that he punched her in the face. Yet, the cops ended up not pressing charges. So just a few weeks later, on July 5th, 1964, Clifford's birthday ended up being his last. Because instead of spending it at home with his family, he went out and spent it with his friends. When he got home the next day, Theresa was furious, more than she had ever been before, and this sparked one of the biggest fights the couple ever had. To end it, Clifford told Theresa that he was done with her and was going to file for divorce. But Theresa couldn't imagine being with someone else. As he was walking out of the door, she grabbed a rifle and shot him in the back, killing him instantly. Theresa was arrested at the scene, but ended up pleading not guilty at the trial. She claimed that Clifford was physically abusive and an alcoholic, adding that he would beat her up all of the time. She said that night was going to be the same. He was going to beat her up as she was scared for her life, so she shot him and killed him. His family didn't agree, however. They testified saying that he wasn't abusive towards her, and says that they believe that she killed him maliciously and unprovoked. And it wasn't just them who didn't believe it. Her own sister says in court that Theresa would kill him before she would let another woman have him. Even with all the testimonies against her, the murder weapon being found at the scene, and the fact that she agreed to killing Clifford, even if it was in self-defence, less than 2 months later, on September 22nd, 1964, Theresa was acquitted of murder. On March 16th, 1965, she gave birth to her second child, Sheila Gay Sanders. At this point, her life was vastly different than it was 5 years ago, before she moved out and had to cope with it all on her own. So Theresa turned to alcohol. A few years into it, Theresa met United States Marine Private Robert Knorr. She got pregnant soon after they met, and on July 9th, 1966, the two got married. And on September 27th, 1966, she gave birth to their first child together, Suzanne Marlene Knorr, and the two went on to have 3 more children together, William Knorr, Robert Knorr Jr. and Terry Knorr, all in a space of 5 years. So right before Terry was born, Theresa became possessive and jealous once again. She started accusing Robert of cheating on her when he wasn't. She wouldn't believe him, and eventually the accusations got too much for him and Robert filed for divorce, and the two parted ways in 1970. Robert still wanted to have a relationship with his children, but Theresa never let him. She did everything in her power to keep him away from the children, even if it meant marrying someone else and moving away. So that's exactly what she did next. Desperate to find a man that would put up with her, she married 2 more times. First, she married a man called Ronald, a railroad worker, but she only used him to watch her kids while she went out drinking and partying. He left her a year into the relationship. Finally, Theresa married Chester Harris, who was a copy editor at the Sacramento Union. This final marriage would only last 2 months. Theresa was jealous of the fact that Chester was growing close to her daughter Suzanne and couldn't deal with it. So she filed for divorce and the two went their separate ways. This now meant that Theresa didn't have a man to distract her, someone that she could direct her anger towards, so she turned it towards her children instead. The first one on the list was Suzanne. Theresa was convinced that Chester had turned her into a witch, and that she had cast a spell on her that was making her gain weight. This sounds ridiculous, but Theresa didn't stop there. Her abuse wasn't just verbal, it got bad, unbelievably vile, and terrifying. Her low self-esteem, combined with the alcohol abuse and the weight gain, led Theresa to having severe mental health problems. Deteriorating, she became delirious, would make insane scenarios in her head. She started taking drastic steps and took her children out of school and cut the phone lines to the house. They weren't allowed to leave, nor could they have anybody over. They were trapped. And to make things worse, she took the children out of the environment that they knew and moved from a house in Orangevale to a small 2-bedroom apartment in Sacramento. The eldest Howard left the home before the move, but all the others didn't have a choice and had to go with her. But now they were trapped in a city that they didn't even know. Theresa started doing to her children what she had done to all of her husbands. She would accuse them of things they hadn't done, things that they couldn't possibly do. And when they tried to defend themselves and say that they didn't do anything, she would beat them senseless. On a regular basis, she beat the children with a wooden board that was 3 foot long and 1.5 inches thick. She would beat one child while making the others hold them down, involving the whole family in the abuse, leaving them with no other way out. When Theresa didn't feel like bringing out the board, she would burn them with cigarettes, and she would often fling knives at them as a game, and wouldn't let them get any sleep. And if any of the children dared to tell anybody about the abuse, things would get 10 times worse. On one occasion, Terry, the youngest, told people that Theresa didn't take care of her children. As a punishment, she locked her in a freezer and left her there for 4 hours. But the worst of Theresa's abuse was directed at her oldest daughters. The other children says that Theresa was jealous of them blossoming into beautiful young women, while she herself was getting older. This made her jealous of her own daughters, and she started singling them out for horrific abuse. The first was Suzanne, as Theresa believed that Suzanne's spells were behind her gaining weight. She decided that Suzanne needed to gain weight also, so she would tie her up and force-feed her pots full of macaroni cheese with huge amounts of lard added to it. Obviously, Suzanne couldn't eat a lot of it before getting too full, but she wasn't allowed to stop. Even if she threw up because of how full she was, Theresa would make her eat that as well. At one point, Suzanne ran away and tried to tell authorities that she was being abused, but no one took her claims seriously, and she was sent back home, back to her abuser. Now Theresa was even more angry with Suzanne. When she got home, she handcuffed her to the bottom of a dining table and left her there gagged. Suzanne had to stay there, being beaten and force-fed, and when Theresa couldn't do it herself, she made her sons Robert and William carry out the abuse instead. This was Suzanne's life for the next 2.5 years. But one day, Suzanne and Theresa got into an almighty argument, and Theresa did to her what she had done to her first husband, Clifford. She shot her in the back. The bullet got lodged into Suzanne's back, but she was alive. No one was allowed to call for medical assistance. Instead, Theresa had her sons put her into the bathtub and handcuff her there, and there is where she stayed for the next couple of weeks. Somehow, Suzanne survived this whole ordeal, but as she was okay enough to leave the bathtub, she was handcuffed back under the kitchen table. This was when Suzanne begged Theresa to let her go and that she would disappear and not tell anybody anything. Strangely, Theresa agreed, but on one condition: that Suzanne let her take the bullet out of her back so that it couldn't be used as evidence later down the line. Desperate to escape her torture, Suzanne agreed. So Theresa gave her drugs and alcohol to make her pass out, and then cut the bullet out of her back. To get rid of the bullet, she then flushed it down the toilet. The bullet was gone. But when Suzanne woke up, she was in unbearable pain. The surgical site was infected, and she ended up getting sepsis and jaundice. Being as weak as she couldn't even control her bladder. So Theresa wrapped her up in diapers. Eventually, she couldn't go on and just lay unconscious on the kitchen floor. At this point, Theresa told her other children that Suzanne was possessed by a demon, and the only way to get rid of the demon was to burn it. She then taped Suzanne's mouth and hands, packed her things in trash bags, and drove her to a secluded side road. There, Theresa had her sons pour gasoline all over Suzanne and lit her on fire. 17-year-old Suzanne suffered everything and survived, but died as a result of the fire. Once Suzanne was gone, Theresa's rage needed a new victim. So she picked her other daughter, 20-year-old Sheila. Sheila had just witnessed everything that happened to her sister, and she knew that she couldn't defy her mother under any circumstances. Theresa had her forced into prostitution to bring in money to run the house, and she'd done it without question. One day, Theresa came out accusing Sheila, saying that she was pregnant and had an STI, saying that she knew this for a fact because she herself caught the STI from the shared toilet seat in the apartment. Sheila denied the accusations, and well, from her history, we know that Theresa doesn't like when people deny accusations she's hurling at them. So to make Sheila confess, she hog-tied her and locked her in a tiny, unventilated broom closet. Sheila spent weeks in this closet, and if she cried to be let out, Theresa would turn up the TV louder so no one could hear her. She didn't allow her any food or water, but her sister Terry would sneak her some whenever she could. But one day they heard a loud thud come from the closet, and Sheila went silent. 3 days later, an unbearable smell started coming out of the closet. Theresa opened the door to see what was going on and found Sheila's rotting dead body. Totally unfazed by this, she asked her sons to find the biggest box they could so that they could get rid of the body. They wrapped her up in bed sheets and stuffed her into this box. The plan was to drive to a road and burn her too, like they did with her sister. But before they could do this, a police officer showed up, so the family fled to Mauritius Creek and dumped the box there. They couldn't set it on fire because they were worried that it would draw attention. When they got back to the house, Theresa told the children to pour lighter fluid all over the house and set it ablaze to cover their tracks. They did it and ran. But before the fire reached the closet, the fire department put it out. When they were investigating, they found the entire floorboards of this closet had decomposition human remains on it. The investigation started, but Theresa had ran away by then. Terry tried to tell police about what had happened, but everyone thought that she was lying and just totally dismissed her, saying that her stories were nothing but a fabrication. It wasn't until years later, in 1993, through America's Most Wanted, that Terry was directed towards the right people who would listen and connect the dots to the 2 Jane Does that they had found in the 80s. An arrest warrant was issued for Theresa and her sons. Robert was already in prison on a murder charge. William was found and arrested in a woodland in California, but Theresa was still missing. She had reverted back to her maiden name and was working as a caretaker in Salt Lake City. And just as she was about to skip town once again, the police caught her. Ironically, her sons agreed to testify against her in exchange of having all the charges against them dropped. And since they were children at the time of the crimes and didn't kill either of the girls themselves, the investigation focused solely on Theresa. So she was charged with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, and 2 special charges, multiple murders and murders by torture. At first, she tried to plead not guilty, but when she found out that her sons were testifying against her, she switched her plea so that she could avoid the death penalty. On October 17, 1995, Theresa Knorr was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences and is serving them at the California Institute for Women. In November of 2027, only 6 years from now, Theresa Knorr will be eligible for parole at the age of 81. Isn't it terrifying to think someone like this could be allowed to roam the streets within the next 6 years? That is, if she actually lives to see that day. So guys, that wraps up our glimpse into the awful story of Theresa Knorr. Which story would you like to see me cover next? Let me know in the comment section below. And make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. And hit the bell icon for notifications every time I upload. And I will see you all next week for another video. So take care. Bye!